Hi, welcome to Nara Fellowship. Today I have a special guest. I am so thrilled to have Linda Seger on. She is one of the pioneers in women in film and video. She is a retired script consultant, an author with 19 books and a bunch of different editions, and also um, uh, a speaker. She's done script seminars all over the world, like 30 countries or something like that, something crazy like that, over 30 or 40 years of her life. And I am thrilled to have her. My dad thought very highly of her. Most people might know her from her benchmark book, Making a Good Script Great. And she's one of the first um, women in script writing education that had pioneered the uh, the business of actually doing script consulting um, in our modern times. So I am thrilled to have you on. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Linda.
Oh, yeah, Valerie, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So what we usually do for um, our fellowship is we talk about learning. And I've been reading your latest book, your memoir called Unpacking. And I've been enjoying it because as a learner, I'm meeting a fellow learner who has done a whole bunch of stuff, personally and also professionally, and using your learning skills both academically and also in the trenches of business uh, and in showbiz. So that was really cool. I'd like to talk about a little bit about that. But you have a musical background. You started as a small town girl in Wisconsin. I have no idea how to pronounce your original town's name. Um,
It's Peshtigo. Peshtigo, as we used to say in our cheers for the football team.
ah,
Peshtigo.
cool. And so what I usually do is I start off with a little bit of a get to know you question, but it's a different slant. Is I ask my guests, uh, what was your learning journey like? And some people talk about their education. Some people talk about memories that they had that were impactful for them.
Yes.
They talk about their love of learning and what prompted them to really enjoy learning for learning's sake. So there's no wrong answer per se, but it's a
Well,
little way for us to get to know you.
yeah. Well, I was creative. I mean, I've always been creative. I didn't always know I was creative, but my mother used to say the difference between me and my sister in terms of creativity was really quite a bit. And I think as a result that since the school system is what's called convergent learning, where, two what's true makes four and there's only one correct answer. And divergent thinking is, what are possible uses for a brick, which is a very famous creative exercise. And the idea is to go beyond making a wall or a sidewalk. And so I didn't feel that most teachers got me. I just didn't feel that they understood me and I couldn't change my behavior. But I was a good student. And so in high school, I got A's and I went to Colorado College, which is a very good college here in Colorado Springs. And then I went for a master's in drama. I was trying to get a sort of a combination major. My love was in theater. I was a terrible actor, but I knew there had to be a place, someplace in the world for someone in theater who was a terrible actor. And I began to find my way. I took a lot of classes. I did acting, some, just scenes and rarely got cast. But if I did, I worked hard on that one line that I had. And then after I had taught for 2 years at a college level in drama and English, I went back to school and I went for religion and the arts with an emphasis on drama and theology, which is the least marketable degree you could ever get. There is nothing that seems to be possible to do with this degree. And the problem is it's hard to sell yourself because religious people think you must be outrageous because of the drama. Drama people think you must be rigid because of the religion side. And so nobody wants to hire you. And eventually I started my own business because I had all these years analyzing scripts in order to teach them and to direct them. And I had met somebody, a screenwriter, who was having trouble with his script. And I had done a certain method I created on how to analyze a script when I was directing. And I said, let me try this with your script. And in 1 hour, I had identified all the problems. And he says, nobody's been able to clarify what's wrong. And in 1 hour, you did this. And I began to think I might have something. I was a natural entrepreneur. I'm very self-directed. I don't go to my office and stare at the wall and not know what I'm supposed to do. And so once I could figure out how to sell this business, which I did by going to a careers consultant and learning a whole lot about how to start a business no one's ever heard of and no one has ever paid for. And so I started my business September 17th, 1981, by placing an ad in the Hollywood Reporter and starting to get clients. And I had enough clients by 1983, meaning they were flowing to me enough that I was full time and I could make a living. It was not a good living in 1983, but it started to do well about 1985. So I have lots of education in many different areas. And when I went to seminary, I finally found a teacher who got me and figured me out. And when I was getting my doctorate, he took me aside and he gave me the best compliment I've ever gotten. He said, I am really pleased with who you have become as a person. It was touch and go there for a while, but you did it.
Aw, that's very heartening words.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. I'd like to unpack the teaching at the college. So you did a lot of learning, both academically and professionally, and business-wise, of like learning how to do all this stuff on your own. They didn't really teach entrepreneurship back in the '80s that I know of. Um,
Right.
and so you had to figure out how to do stuff on your own. Um,
Yeah.
so you were good because of all your schooling and your academic work. You were a good researcher, which probably helped you a ton. But
Yeah.
how did the teaching for the colleges for a couple years? How did that come about?
Well, the first thing was I got a job teaching at a college in Phoenix called Grand Canyon College, which was a college of 600 when I was there. That was late 60s and is now like 40,000 or something. It's
Wow.
huge, has online classes and everything. And I taught there for 2 years when I went back to seminary. And I did some teaching both at the seminary and at a college in the Berkeley area. And after I got my doctorate, I got a year sabbatical leave replacement job where I was replacing the drama teacher and the religion teacher that
Oh,
year because of my background. And I taught there, but it was only a 1 year job. And I got a part time job. I taught at the University of Laverne, which is on the outskirts of Los Angeles, and they had the prison contract. So I taught at three different prisons
wow.
in Southern California in humanities, if you can imagine.
Wow.
And I actually enjoyed that. But I think the teaching experience helped me to do these short term 2 day seminars. But I also went to a seminar consultant when I decided to do short term seminars. And I said, I was experienced. I was already a good teacher. Someone said I missed being teacher of the year in Kansas by one vote,
Oh,
something like that. But doing these short term seminars takes a slightly different slant. So I worked with a seminar consultant And I became known as the person who hired consultants for everything. I had a clothes consultant. I'm sure she would like my pink blouse, which is the right color for television. That was one of the things they did. And um, I was prepared for doing television and, interviews. And um, so anything I felt I didn't know because I didn't have a background preparing me for this, I would try to find somebody who would work with me. And I thought of assembling a team because if you don't have a parent in the business or your uncle is the president of a studio, that is very difficult to know how do I even break into
Mhm.
this.
Yeah.
And so I worked with a career consultant named Judith Clare in Los Angeles, who was absolutely brilliant. And I came with this question: how do you make a business work that no one has heard of and they've never paid for it? And she says, that's what we're going to make happen. And I started working with her in 81. My business was very small. And actually, I think I started in 83. I had been working part time as a script consultant, but I needed to have more clients in order to be full time, and I needed to be able to raise my rates. And so Judith worked with me. How are you going to do this? So in 83, I was full time, meaning I had enough work coming in that I could make a living. And then by 85, I was doing well. And by 87, I was teaching around the world. So I taught in
Uh,
33 countries on all six continents, except for Antarctica,
ah,
unfortunately. What a sad thing.
yeah.
So,
So, so a couple things, a little more nuance on actually the teaching between both classes and also the prison and also the seminars. What did you learn of like how to teach better for each different audience? What were the things that you learned that are different from the each of those three things?
well, in college, generally it's an hour class. Sometimes, like in the prison, it was a 3 hour class, and we'd have a
Oh,
break after an hour and a half. But most of the time, the way I would do my seminars is they would be for 2 days, and they would be four sessions of 90 minutes each. So sort of from 9:30 to 5 with a break for lunch and two breaks, during the day. And then you're trying to get material out conceptually when you're doing these 2 day seminars. So I would have 90 minutes on conflict. What are five different forms of conflict that you can have with your character? And so I would work on those. I would write them out at first. I would practice them. Literally, I learned that in order to do an hour seminar that is new, that you're doing for the first time, rehearse it 10 times.
mm,
So I was very disciplined on my learning because I never felt I was the kind of person who could wing it. And I
mm,
never felt I was the kind of person that just naturally, where sometimes really smart people, as they say, well, I never study. I said, boy, I was not that kind of person. I was somebody who, because my IQ is not genius or gifted. I have a good IQ, but I'm not one of those people where it just fell into your lap because you were naturally smart. I had to work really hard. And I suppose it was also because I came from a small town of 2,500 people in northern Wisconsin, Peshtigo. And so I didn't grow up with what you think of the privilege of people in the business, or, you could ask your Uncle Ted, would you please write a letter of endorsement or something? Um, what I was good at was I was good at writing those essays to get into the college of your choice. And I did. I went to Colorado College, which is here in Colorado Springs. And I also went, very influential, it was a 5 week course between junior and senior year in high school at Northwestern University called the National High School Institute. And they took 75 kids from all over the country in this 5-week drama class. And it was life changing. I had very little experience in drama because of being in a small high school, public high school. And that paved the way for other things, like when I went to Northwestern University for my master's degree, that program obviously, like, yes, I'm in, and I'm in partly because what I did when I was 16 or 17. So what I found was all experience is relevant, and that taking your experience, meeting people, just being out there is kind of important in a business. Now, for me, I was a natural extrovert. And I think this is a lot harder if you're an introvert because you got to be out there, whether it's handing out business cards. And Women in Film was extremely influential for me, this organization that's actually all over the world now. And I got clients from there, but I also took workshops and I met people and got advice. So the whole, it eventually starts coming together, and people started hiring me and I started doing seminars.
Oh, cool. So a lot of it is very practical for you. I know there's some books out there that talk about the art of teaching and learning, like being a teacher like that understands your student, like your one teacher who understood you in college. Um,
Yes.
and did did you kind of gain any insight from him or from others of like how to teach something better? How to
Um,
convey a concept better? Or is it mostly like you organize it into an essay and then you practice, uh, you know, doing the speaking out loud the essay to convey the information?
well, one of the things the seminar person said to me, she said, I had a very good sense of humor. And she said, you do funny things, but you don't leave room for people to laugh. And she
Oh,
said, don't be afraid of silence. And she said, when you're writing, key concepts on a board, she said, you keep talking. You don't need to keep talking. Let us settle with them. Take your time. Silence is all right. Begin to be comfortable with those moments of silence in a seminar where you are just writing and they are writing down, what you say. Um,
oh,
I was a good explainer, and I think that shows in my books as well as in my teaching. And this idea of what I call conceptual teaching, where you have one word, like for instance, if you're talking about conflict, you can have relationship conflict one on one, but you can have group conflict, like if I were angry at the military because I'd been in the military and didn't get my pension or something, I'm I'm having conflict with a group. And so I could spend 15 minutes talking about the kind of group conflicts that we might see in a script. So trying to get these ideas down in one or two words and then telling stories about that. I showed video clips in my screenwriting classes around the world and had somebody edit them. I didn't just kind of grab something. I had a professional editor help me edit these film clips that, I could show 5 different kinds of conflict, for instance. So
yeah.
I was always looking, to people. And one time I heard a man do a brilliant, brilliant speech on creativity. And I had the nerve to ask him, I said, what would you ordinarily be paid for that 1 hour speech? Because it was worth every penny. And he said, $7,500 for 1 hour. And I said to myself, that was worth it. This guy knew how to teach. And so I would have some of these role models where you say stories. And of course, I had the advantage of film clips, and I could use those to illustrate my point of, let me show you a good example of this idea, let's say of person versus group conflict, and then what movie as a person against the corporation, person against the army, these kind of conflicts. I also think, I mean, side side things that are about this. I always dressed in color. I mean, I went to a professional because I thought people are going to be looking at me for 8 hours a day. And so she helped me choose a wardrobe, which I always wore bright colors, which I think gives a brightness to the room. You're not just there getting bored. And so I think there were a lot of little things that I learned along the way of how to establish rapport with the group who I'm teaching. And also culturally is trying to be aware what, like if I'm in Denmark, what is the biggest hit in Denmark for a movie? Could I use a clip from that? And could I maybe even talk about that particular movie as a learning film as well? And I tried to be a good guest. I got better and better at this, but you go into all these different countries, they don't know what you're like. And sometimes they have you on a really big pedestal. And sometimes they kind of park you at the hotel. And I said, I want to see this city. Is there someone who would take me around? And I was proactive without being pushy. And I found a lot of nuanced behavior of trying not to make mistakes culturally.
Mm.
Sometimes when I was invited someplace, I would write to the person there and say, what am I going to do that I shouldn't do in your country? And so that I don't do it. And so they would tell me sort of where the line is that I should walk. And I tried to be very aware of that as well.
Wow, that's a nice comprehensive answer. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Because you touched on so many wonderful things. You talked about teaching and learning. You also talked about the dealing with the cultural differences with different countries, learning, like finding out what this is before the internet when we had everything at our fingertips. So you had to be proactive of like reaching out to talk to people. You know, it's like I read in your book about your adventures in Russia. It's like
yeah, yeah,
and finding out, and it was still kind of heebie-jeebie kind of stuff going on back then. This is after the Berlin Wall fell, but still, you had to be very careful what you said and did, um,
yes. And where
and,
you went, and
and
don't
where
go
you went.
places alone. Whatever you do,
Yeah.
we were at a retreat center just outside Moscow, and it was a writers kind of retreat with professional writers, like we would do if we did a retreat with the Writers Guild, for instance. And we had a kind of a wall around the retreat, but not like a gate or anything like that. And I started just walking around a bit, and I walked out the gate, and after half a block, I said, "Don't do this. You gotta do not be very careful you walk." And in South Africa, we were told very specifically, you can walk down this street for the block to the restaurant. Do not walk down this street parallel 1 block over as you go to the restaurant. And when you leave the restaurant, tell the receptionist to keep an eye on you until you make this turn, and then people at the cafe will see you and you will be safe. And I said, well, should we take a taxi for the block or two? She said, no, just follow exactly what I said and you will be fine. And I was very careful about dangerous situations, but I didn't presume a place was dangerous. So
Mm.
I would do my research And I found like I was invited to Kurdistan during the Iraq War, and that was not I didn't go. But the way I researched it was the State Department research is just very vague and they don't know your situation. I had a friend who was on a military think tank who had friends with generals. And I would say, I have an invitation to Kazakhstan. Is this safe? And she would ask her generals, and the generals would write to her, and she'd forward it, and they say yes. The Kazakhstan is actually very pro-American, and you'll always be with people. And then they'll say, I went to Ukraine. I think it was 2011, but I wouldn't have gone in 2014, and I wouldn't go now, of course. And so they would sometimes say, when I went to Russia in 1991, it was all right. I wouldn't go to Russia now. And so they would say, you'll probably be all right, but you're American, you're going to be a target. People know you're an American from 2 blocks away. So I would not go at such and such a place. I was invited to Iran, and I said, don't take for granted that you shouldn't go to Iran. And so the generals said, there's still a lot of anti-American sentiment. There's pro-American sentiment too, but you're going to be in a kind of a visual professional area at a film festival. There might be a film that's controversial and you could be the target even though you had nothing to do with that film. So he said, I wouldn't go now, but you would probably be all right, but I wouldn't go now. And so I trusted what these generals told me, and I felt very sort of privileged that I actually, had these people in my life I could turn to, and and I went to really interesting places. I went to Dubai and United Arab Emirates, that was safe, and I actually think probably Saudi Arabia would have been safe. I wasn't invited there, but some of these places you think, oh, I probably shouldn't. You say, well, don't take for granted. Get the information and do your research.
Mm. That's really helpful because there's a lot of people with big dreams to travel, and they either fall into camp of like foolhardiness, recklessness, or overcautiousness, and you had a good
Yes.
balance of both. You you enjoyed the adventure, but you weren't reckless and foolhardy in where and what you did, which is a good balance to have. I have not really traveled, so it was really interesting reading about your journey in the book. I only got halfway through, so I was like, I'm not going to be able to finish in time.
This is the book,
Yep,
Contact Me.
I will
Remember,
link it in the. I will definitely link it in the
yes,
description.
yes,
Um,
yes.
so I appreciate that. Um, there's a couple other things I'd like to talk about, um, but you had everything kind of into. You're like a polymath. You wove in a lot of creative stuff from your youth and a lot of um, schooling, and also your mother taught you music and everything, so that was kind of cool. And you did play, recitals and all this kind of stuff, and that was really neat. And she was an adventurous soul too. It was just, did you get your love of learning from your mother, and or was it other influences that helped you shape you into being a researcher and a go-getter?
Well, one thing I was a very curious person in grade school, high school. In fact, the little saying that was next to my picture in my high school, the big book that they do, was the questions that come from an inquiring mind.
Aw.
And I often I can remember when I was in seventh grade, going to class and asking my teacher just strange questions. Like, this is just a for instance, I read about someone else. Why doesn't it hurt when you get your hair cut? and so I'd have these strange questions, and often I would come and she would answer them, or sometimes, I'd figure out a way to answer them. But my mother was very open and she was very nurturing, and things that we were interested, she tried to make happen for us. So we went on vacations. I loved horses. We went to a dude ranch when I was 13. We went to Washington, D.C. when I was 12 because she wanted us to know something about our country. And so there was a love of adventure with my mother that I think that I got. And I suppose because of being in a small town, you're a little wary. You don't really know always what to do, but that didn't keep us from going to some cities and visiting, like when we went to DC. But I think it was her openness and her nurturing. I can remember realizing if I really showed a strong interest in something, my mother would try to make it happen. And I learned quickly to really think, was I really interested? At one point, I said to her, maybe I was in high school, I'd like to learn to shoot a gun. And she said, I bet we could find somebody in Green Bay, which was 50 miles away, to do that. And then I thought, and I said, I'm really not that interested.
Aw.
And she knew I loved horses. And I think if I had pushed, she probably would have had me get a horse. There was a stable not too far away, but I didn't know anything on how to take care of a horse or anything like that. So we looked for other opportunities like this dude ranch. And when I was older, from 1991 to 2015, I went back to riding. I did competitive Western riding. I did 1 week riding vacations. I was in France. I was in Spain. I was in Italy. I was on the Pony Express Trail. I was
Wow.
San Francisco Bay Area north, did a 1 week ride along the Pacific Ocean. And so because she was always like, that is fine to be adventurous. And mother always said, invest in experiences. They're better than stocks and bonds.
Aw.
And so this idea that you look for interesting experiences and then you go for it, even though it sounds like I can't, that just doesn't sound possible. So, for instance, you mentioned the piano. I went back to piano in 2017 and I decided I was interested in two piano work, not in solos. Now, most people would probably say, well, that's really hard. You got to find a partner who's about equal and wants to invest in time. And so you would just say that was a neat idea, but I guess that's just too hard. I would say that's a neat idea. How do I find a two piano partner? Well, my teachers helped me, and I have the most incredible piano partners. I have several of them. Every year I do a birthday recital and I invite people, and it's usually an hour long. I did one August 10th, and this year I rented the recital music hall at Colorado College. Now, what happens when I first get these ideas, it's easy to say it's going to be far too expensive, and people like me don't go out and rent the music hall where all the professionals play. I say, well, why not? Because my mother taught me to say, like, why not me? Why wouldn't I do that? So I made it happen, and about 150 people came to celebrate my birthday, which is this coming Wednesday, but we did this August 10th. And I did a 1 hour recital, including a piano quartet where you have two people at each piano. It's called Two Pianos, Eight Hands. And most people had never seen a piano quartet before. And I had seen one, and I said, well, why wouldn't I do a piano quartet? I just have to find three people who want to do a piano quartet. So I think my mother laid the groundwork for you go after things and you don't presume. And I had an aunt who, when I was 7, we went to a lighthouse and they were climbing up to see the top light. And I was scared to go up the ladder. And she just let me just, you don't have to. But then she took my hand as we were walking back and she said, one thing to say to yourself, if other people have done it, you probably can do it also.
Mm,
And so what, I mean, can you imagine a life lesson like that at the age of 7? So
yeah,
you well, if other people went out of state to college, I could do that. If other people go to Russia, I could go to Russia. And the thing is caution and safety. I am not a foolhardy person. I've been in some difficult situations and at various times in my life, which people can read about in unpacking. But I think it's great to have a mother who's positive in her outlook. And she also said, she told me this when I was growing up. She said, I always wanted you to believe life was good. I mean, what a great life lesson. And so, I wasn't afraid of life. I was not a physical brave person. So, I wasn't one to climb the tree. I don't think I've climbed a tree in my entire life because I was always too scared. Maybe that should be the next thing I do. But for instance, my 80th birthday is Wednesday, August 27th. I'm going to fly a flight simulator at a hotel by the Air Force Academy, and I have chosen to fly the Boeing 737.
nice, very cool.
You believe? And my husband, I think, is going to fly the F-16. And
Oh,
so it's like, it's a 30-minute kind of thing. And I have done this one other time at a museum, maybe for 5 minutes. But I think, I said, what a cool thing. It's, there's no danger. I can
yeah,
imagine, if I can even, I suppose I'm going to make every mistake. Um, but I just think it's such a fun thing when I saw Flight Simulator. Is that what a cool thing to do is to get in the controls and find out what those buttons are and all of that. So,
that's pretty neat. That's pretty cool. Um, I'd like to talk about a kind of a hard time in your life, but if you don't want to go there, that's fine. But when you were dealing with, you were just, you were struggling financially with your business in the beginning. You were on food stamps, you talked about in the book, and it was a really hard struggle finance to be able to pay the bills and stuff. And then all of a sudden, as your book launched and your seminar classes went through the roof, you made a lot more money. Do you? What were some of the lessons you learned from both those extremes that you kind of took to heart?
well, the first thing in seminary, now my parents, they would not let me fall through the cracks, but I did not want to be dependent on my parents, especially when I was in grad school and I went to seminary for 5 years and got this master's in religion and the arts and a doctorate in drama and theology, this part of religion and the arts. So on the one hand, I knew I was never going to totally fall through the cracks. I was not going to be homeless, but I wanted to do it myself. And I realized there's always strings attached as you get older when you depend on your parents for your money or your, schooling or something. I don't think it's a problem so much in college, but there's a point you're close to 30 years old and your parents are financing something. So I decided I was going to do it myself, and it was very tough. I had a job at a church, and I sometimes had a work study, various kinds of jobs where so the government pays 80% and the place where you work pays 20. So I went to a professional theater and said, you only have to pay $6 a week because the government's going to pay the other 80%. And I'd like to work at the theater. And she said, we need someone to iron the costumes. And that's worth it to us for $6 a week. So I worked at a professional theater and I sat in on the directors, directing. But so I kind of learned to um, have hard times when you're turning over every quarter. You don't park at parking meters because you can't afford the dime. And I mean, and my lowest point was when the only thing in my cupboard was some cereal and I had to put water on it to eat my cereal because there was nothing else to eat in that house. And I got on food stamps, which takes about 6 weeks. But I think what it did is I am extremely empathetic to people who are poor, and I don't have that judgment that some people say, get a job, as I said, I know something about what that's like and how few people have that foundation I had. My parents would not let me fall through the cracks, but most people, it's just so difficult and they work so hard and I had privileges, they call it white middle class privilege. I had all of that going for me. So I had a middle class mind, which said you work for what it is you want. So I didn't have an entitlement mind that can come from upper classes, and I didn't have I can't do it mind, which can come from poverty. And so I was, able to do some things that other people couldn't. So I learned, and really in the last few years, especially just to value this. When I got my third master's degree, which was in feminist theology, I went to the Philippines and worked with a charity for 10 days. And again, seeing poor people, how do they form community? How do they deal with the disadvantages, rather than the privilege that I might have is what is their situation? And I learned not to get into, let me give you some advice on how to become a middle class person. Um, that I think I became just much more sympathetic and empathetic, which I consider, a very important lesson. Well, then you have the opposite lesson. When you start doing well, which I did, I was scared of having too much money. I
Oh,
had not had enough. And I thought, well, what do you do if you have more than you need? Well, I guess we just make sure I never have more than I need. I said, no. So I went to a financial advisor, and she really helped me not only work out my retirement, because I've been retired since 2020, but she helped me all along the way. And I always had someone to go to. If I said I want to buy a horse, I would call Melody. Can I buy a horse? And she said, you can have this much money on the money you've saved, but you have to feed the horse and keep the horse in your monthly money. If your income is enough for what the horse's boarding is, you can have a horse. And so they would tell me, she said, you may not have the $34,000 horse. you know, so there was all what I learned. I started to learn something about money and just said, I don't, I don't understand this. Let's go to the experts. I'm not going to just say, let's buy this stock because I guess we'll get Paramount stock this month and say, well, maybe not. So I learned to seek experts in all these different areas where most of the time people sort of try to figure it out. They sort of say, I'll just make this decision. And I didn't make a lot of stupid decisions. because I always had someone, and whether it was finances or whether it was careers, I made sure there was somebody who knew something about that particular area where I could take a class or I could call on them. And so, as I look from being retired, I look back and say, on the whole, I made a lot of very good decisions in my career and in my life choices. And I had to think carefully. I mean, moving to Colorado, I thought, am I going to ruin my whole career moving to Colorado and consulting and going off on seminars and continuing to write books from Colorado? And it was scary, but I found my dream house and I said, I think there's a question I always ask, is this a blessing or a temptation? And I said, I think this one is a blessing. And it has been. It has not hurt my business to move to Colorado. And it has been, I adore Colorado. So I love living where I live.
Colorado is beautiful. My dad moved us out to Colorado back in 1980 from New York, and we've never been back. And
Yes.
and we met other media professionals such as yourself who have fallen in love with Colorado and moved here as well. Um, and it's just a beautiful state. It's like the weather is not too hot, not too cold. You know, we get snowstorms and stuff, but we don't have the deluge of the East Coast, and we don't have the earthquakes of the West Coast.
Yeah,
We have
we do have
fires
the
and
forest
tornadoes,
fires.
but that's
Yeah.
not too bad.
And as you say, I don't know if you can see through the window, but we live 5 miles from Colorado Springs, but we live in the mountains in a house that's about 103 years old now. And
Wow.
the people who built it had extremely good taste. So it's a beautiful log home in the mountains.
Wow.
And I think that's another thing about going after your dreams is to try to know what you truly want rather than what people tell you that you're supposed to want.
Mm,
Like, are you supposed to want a modern house with 3 bedrooms, or is what you really want a 2-story log home? Which is it you really want? And
mm.
then go after that. And that's true whether it's cars or husbands. Like, I used to imagine I would marry a producer. Well, I married a massage therapist and acupuncturist, and we've been together 40 years, and I've been extremely happy with my sweetheart, of which there's a whole chapter about my dear Peter in the book.
I look forward to reading that. Yeah. What? So you went through a learning journey of relationships and how to deal with people better, and you had a character change, which your teacher was complimenting on you, and in your seminary, and your theater work and stuff, and you had some very hardening stories of actually improving yourself into a better, more likable, more diplomatic person. What thoughts do you have of like, for people who struggle with, like a temper or something like that, or something of that ilk? What words of encouragement would you have for them to learn and grow beyond that?
Yeah. Well, as they say in Tootsie, I told you to go to a therapist.
Oh,
And I think there's you know, and there tends to be with some groups of people, this sort of negative feeling about seeking help. I really believe in seeking help and in turning to people who are expert in whatever the area is and keeping a good attitude and being I guess I would also say being aware, like physically when I did horses, I just love that stage of my life. And spiritually, I've gone on spiritual retreats. I'm was a Quaker for 50 years. I still sometimes do online things with Quakers, but I'm a member of the United Church of Christ, and You said, I need an in-person spiritual community, and I have about as good as you can get, the church 4 miles down the road. So I've paid attention to these different parts of me. What are the intellectual? I'm part of 2 book clubs now, and I was, uh, I think you probably read about some of the other crises in my life. I have a movement disorder called dystonia, which probably very few people will notice because I found an expert in Houston and I worked with her for a number of years. And I'm I'm not 100% better. I'm 95%, and this is considered incurable. So again, it was that sense you look for experts. And a friend of mine, when I was very despairing, it means your head, in my case, the head moves involuntarily to the left. And when it was at its worst, I would bring it back. Then the head moves to the left. I would bring it back. It was horrible. It was the edge of despair. And a friend of mine said, someone in the world is an expert at this. Find that person. And I found her in Houston, and I went to her about every 6 weeks to 2 months for some years, because this happened in 2008. And then when COVID came, I stopped making that journey. But by that time, as you notice, I'm, pretty straight. Now I do, one of the ways I learn to compensate, I will do this more than most people do that. It
Uh-huh.
just kind of helps. But I found like everyone is seated on my right because my head tends to turn to the left. So if I'm out to lunch, the person is either going to be in front of me or on my right. And I don't carry a purse, which weighs down my shoulders. I have a purse that ties on my belt. And so you learn these ways of compensating, but you also learn good attitudes and not fake attitudes. I think authentic attitudes. So I'll just go into this other crisis point. I have cancer and I have stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, which sounds awful. Now, this is how I explain it. Most people who have stage 4 cancer, first of all, they might be on the edge of death. I'm not on the edge of death. My doctor has said the treatments are working great. You will probably live a normal lifespan and you will be around for a while. Because I would keep saying, do I have to cancel Christmas? She said, no, you do not have to cancel Christmas. But most people, again, there's this empathy that I have tried to develop over many years. Most people who have cancer, they don't have a background of being around people with cancer. So it is a horrible diagnosis. So many of my friends have had cancer and survived. It's like, well, it's most people I know, we get through it. Secondly, so many people that have cancer, they, let's say they don't have a second car. So it's hard to get to your doctor's appointments. They don't have good insurance. They don't have a supportive spouse. They have little children. There are so many things that people who have cancer deal with. I only have cancer. I have a supportive spouse. I have a home. I think the financial strain of cancer is that for many people, like if you don't have good insurance, there is very, very difficult because you have cancer and you have all the other stressors. I don't have those stressors. I have beautiful piano. I have good friends. I can rest when I need to. I'm retired. I mean, I feel so privileged in this journey. And that doesn't mean the journey isn't difficult. There are moments of anxiety. And on the whole, um, it's sort of this is how it is. And as one of my friends said, I've never seen anyone with cancer with a better attitude than you.
No.
And I said, it's fine because the treatment is working, but because, again, I make sure my doctors are people I like. So I don't just go because somebody says, this is the doctor you should go to. I have a amazing oncologist. I mean, I can go through, there's this whole care team. And I say, when I started this journey, I said, think of the wonderful people I'm going to meet. People who are compassionate and empathetic and know their work and, you know, and you feel privileged that I got to meet my oncologist, and so I think there's this kind of attitude, and maybe it's what my mother said is, I want you to feel life is good. And so, we make those decisions. And I talk in the book about these crisis points like dystonia and cancer and these journeys that one goes through. And I just feel so empathetic for people who have these other stressors in their life. Plus, don't maybe, one might say stage 4 is pretty serious. And the doctor said, this is serious. We're going to see if this treatment works. And it works beautifully. And I have very few side effects. And the ones I do is you get another pill. You know, like most of my pills have to do with side effects, not
Yeah.
cancer. But
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things I tried to put in the book that there's these crisis points and there's these frightening things. I mean, I have a chapter on saving someone's life, and I have a chapter on being stuck on a mountain. And the only
Mm.
way it looked like to get off of it was to fall. I,
Oh,
you know, and
you
so
have to read the book to find out what happens.
there's a chapter called, But How Do You Get Off the Mountain? And so I wanted to report some of these crises things and what did I learn from them besides don't go out in the wilderness with someone who's not trustworthy, who tells you they are, and that they're very knowledgeable about hiking and, all that, and say, well, no. She got us into deep, deep trouble. And that was another thing I learned was don't get into dangerous positions where the person you're with is not trustworthy and go with what you know about yourself, not about the other person. If you don't feel safe doing something, don't do it because somebody else feels safe doing it.
Mm, very wise advice. Very wise
So,
advice. So, um, I haven't gotten to the chapter on your husband yet, so I don't know if this is an okay question to ask, but if it's not, we can skip to something else.
yes,
But, um, what have you learned about your husband and also about marriage, being married for 40 years, that heartened you and uplifted you and encouraged you to when you had downtimes with, circumstances and stuff in life that you were during the journey together?
yeah. Well, one thing is we form an idea a lot of times based on the movies of what we're looking for, and then we realize that really is not what we're looking for. For a while, I dated a guy who was very charming and very extroverted and totally loony in a lot of
Mm,
ways. And I said, I want somebody who's comfortable. My mother used to say, somebody who wears well. If just because someone is charming and or vivacious or accomplished or whatever that thing is, that might not be the right person for you. And so I started to look for comfort. And Peter's, he's a very easygoing and he's a very sweet. he's a very dear person and he loves just totally. I mean, he will, he said to me once, he said, "You're prettier than Annette Bening." And I said, "Nobody is prettier than Annette Bening." He said, "No." I said, "That's the right husband to have, is someone who actually thinks you're prettier than Annette Bening." And so I think one thing in our marriage, we're extremely respectful of each other and of each other's callings. So a lot of guys would have trouble with someone like me because I'm going off to Moscow on my own to do a seminar and I'm not sure what hotel I'm staying at. And they would, and Peter was just, that's your calling. That's what you do. And if I'm alone for 10 days or one time, I think it was actually 7 weeks as I went from country to country and did seminars, a lot of guys wouldn't put up with that. And a lot of guys would say, "I want someone who has the food on the table at 6 o'clock and has a martini ready when I get back from work." And I'm not that kind of person. And Peter's not that person either. And so I think um, you can so easily get into some kind of a problem and just by projecting what Hollywood tells you you're supposed to want. Now I'm just going to tell you my power and battery has said it's getting low. I can plug this in, but it would take a few minutes
Should we
to do that
pause it for
directly.
should we pause it
Yeah,
for a
by
few
all
minutes?
means, yes, let's
Okay,
pause it.
let me whoops, my mouse is not working. And we're back. So we're all plugged in and ready to go. Um, so what you were saying was basically you were just finishing talking about your husband and how he's a wonderful person and he is very dear to you and I forgot.
Yeah. Yeah, like I can go on with one of the things a therapist said to me when I had met Peter, and I didn't know if, what kind of, is this a love relationship? What, or I liked him a great deal. And she said, he gets you. He
Mm,
gets who you are. He knows I have ideas. like like I'm a good talker. He knows that that's not a problem, and he's more introverted than me. But I think one of the things is respecting what it is that people feel they are called or they what they want to do and what suits them. So we don't put up barriers. He's got a degree in Chinese medicine and was has done acupuncture. He's retired now, but he spent 7 years at the dining room table studying herbs and needles and where you put them and all of that. And some people might say, you should be working harder to make more money,
mm,
and it's like, no, this is what's important to Peter on many levels. It's important. And so you have that respect. And it's the same thing as how many people want to be married to someone who says, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to Moscow next month." That might be a problem for many people.
mm,
And, or to say, "Well, you didn't ask my permission." And it's, we don't have to I mean, we talk about stuff, but this idea of asking for permission or being submissive, the joke is, a lot of people think the woman should be submissive. And I said, there's no submission in this house. Is There's discussion and communication, but it's not like whatever you say, dear, is those, those words, except for right now, would never be said in this household.
mm,
Um, on the other hand, we have little things. One of our things is that once a year you get a non-negotiable, where if there's something you want the other person or need that other person to do for you, and it's not really something they'd want to do, you are allowed once a year to say, we need to go to this place for dinner, or we need to go to this wedding, even though we don't like the couple and we think that they'll get divorced in 5 months, is that you get, you get to say that. And generally we go a decade without needing to have a non-negotiable, because if there's something you really want, the other person wants to support you. But there, that's one of our rules,
That's a
and
very
they're
cool.
and they don't accumulate. So you
Ah,
can't have you just because you haven't had a non-negotiable for 5 years, that doesn't mean you get five this year. And
ah, that's
so
pretty cool.
so there's just a lot of leeway, and I think getting that Hollywood idea of what you want in a husband, and also getting the idea of you have to get married is, this. I was born in an age where you went to college to find your husband, and you're this things, and I've gone through all these feminist changes in what we might call the new feminist movement, which has had many stages. And so you're you're really thinking what suits my personality. And then we met at Quaker meetings, so we have, I think, having spiritual values in common. It doesn't mean, you have to say you must believe everything I believe. Is It's not a matter of that. It's a matter of you have a similar value system, and you have a similar sense of spiritual things.
Yeah. Speaking of believing stuff, you talked about your longtime friendship with one lady whose name I'm blanking on. I
Yeah.
apologize.
I think I called her Mandy. It was not
Mandy.
her name.
Yeah. And you drifted apart from one of your books of something you believe very strongly in, of your book on that not all Christians are, some Christians are Democrats, which I
Yes,
which I'm kind of, I have an opposite perspective, and I go into that later, but I want to respect where you're coming from, and that
yes,
kind of pulled you apart, and you didn't know it at the time, and
yeah,
and she's a conservative and a Trump supporter, and you're a Democrat, and
yes,
definitely not a Trump supporter, um, but you still through you both were able to navigate that you still wanted the friendship despite that huge difference. And that just resonated with me because I, my family were Christian conservative in the media industry, which is heavily liberal. And we had
yes,
some very dear friends who understood where we were coming from, and they didn't care. They loved us for who we were. But most media people, they would blackball you, back in the 80s and 90s.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and, but, I have a group of friends, they call themselves the geek family, and most of them are liberals and moderates. And so I'm like one of the two only conservatives in the group, but I have a little bit of libertarian leanings as well. But um, to hold on to that friendship, despite different worldviews, competing worldviews in a culture war setting really resonated for me, and I was very heartened by that. And
yeah,
I was wondering if you might share, like, you know, in the chapter you talked about it, you didn't talk about the politics at all. It was just your deep friendship with each other. You guys got each other, and you asked each other really wonderful, deep questions, and
yes.
and it was beautiful. I loved that, and I was just
So
wondering if there's some things that you could share from that, and also your thoughts of like how to actually be that friend and see past the worldview collision and see the person that they truly are.
yeah. Well, the first thing is we met in college, and I was doing a spiritual search, and she had done a spiritual search. And so we really, she helped nurture my spiritual searching without judgment. and had a tremendous impact on how I sort of found my way spiritually. I mean, I became an evangelical for a while, and I still, somebody I know who's a Christian said, "You are a traditional Christian with a liberal sociology." And I thought it was a very good description because if you talked about traditional Christian beliefs, basically I'm on board. I'm quite traditional in terms of my belief system, but I'm liberal in the sense I really want people to be equal and have equal opportunity and to be loved for who they are and respected. So one of my friends is transgender. She's at the church, and we've gotten together occasionally. I mean, we're not close friends, but we would call each other friend. Other friends are lesbian and gay couples. And so those kind of people that sometimes you put them kind of away from you. The liberal sociology is no. If I met a Martian, I would like to not be judgmental because he's green. I would like to think I would be respectful of the personhood of the other person. And so Wendy was extremely transformational for me for many years, because not only during my last year of college, where I went through, it was not a conversion experience. I'd grown up in the church, in the Lutheran church. It was a finding my way to my own place as opposed to where my parents were. And then for many years, we would see each other first every year and then sometimes every 5 years. But the thing that I found was in diverging is that you can really diverge in your value systems. And I think that's where it gets difficult because you don't have things to talk about because your foundation is quite different. And I realize I have gone through many, let's just say, foundational changes, which I've had to do because I was in the film industry. So I had to learn to be open to a lot of different kinds of people. And then going to 33 countries to teach is I had to learn, I'd be in the business center and the person next to me is from Saudi Arabia and the clothes that are part of Saudi Arabian. And I said, would you tell me about this? But it was just learning to be open. So what started to happen, we had nothing to talk about and we weren't seeing each other. She lived in a totally faraway state and we had no foundation anymore. What we had was history. And since I wrote the book, we aren't in contact anymore.
Oh, I'm
So at
sorry.
the end of the book, the the question was I'm exploring. We're sort of seeing where we can be. And I realized I thought too much about this. And we didn't, I think for a while we tried to search what could we talk about. And I realized, number one, I realized history was not enough for me for a friendship. But I think the other thing that happened was um, I, I don't have a timing on my cancer. It's not like someone said, you have 8 months. What I do feel is I feel very protective around me. And I usually do not do this in life. I'm like open, anyone who wants to come in, fine, let's talk, whatever. I'm not in that phase anymore. I'm very protective about um, what do I want to bring into my life that's good and that's of value to me, as opposed to 10 years ago, I would say, let's just talk this out. Let's have many phone calls. I don't have time for that. And it's a funny feeling to just when I might be around another 10 years, but there's sort of this sense that I have things that I care deeply about She has no interest whatsoever in my books, and me as an author, my piano playing. She won't even listen to a DVD of a recital of me. And she has a granddaughter and won't send me pictures. And I just finally said, it's not like making her wrong or me wrong. It's just saying there isn't anything there. And there's other places in my life where there's a lot there. I mean, just for instance, at the church I joined 3 years ago um, there's a lot there, a lot with people. So that chapter was really sort of churning on this whole thing and realizing there are times in life you disengage.
Mm,
And sometimes you disengage totally, and sometimes you disengage and just say, well, I'm maybe not going to write anymore, or I don't need to plan a lunch with this person, not because I don't like them, is because I'd rather plan a lunch with this person where we're going to talk about things that are going to resonate, with me. So she was a very dear person with a good soul. And I valued that. And it's an interesting place to be in life where you think through some of these relationships and you think differently about them and say, and I remember Judith Clare, my career consultant, said, it is all right to disengage. And it's all right to disengage with somebody maybe you're working with and say, I don't want to work with that person anymore. And you don't have to tell them that, or you might if they push you, is to say, this doesn't work. And I went into business for a while with a friend. It didn't work. And we had to work on putting the friendship back to where it was without the business side. And that really took a few years to
mm,
do that. It was worth it. And she's a good friend, here. But I think this is another thing that's important is we go through these different stages and it's easy to get stuck in saying, I do this for history's sake. And I don't want to do things just for the sake of history. That doesn't mean I don't talk to my cousins. So it doesn't mean I don't talk to anyone as part of my history. But it does mean you make some new decisions, which I didn't expect I would ordinarily make, but
mm.
I've made.
I appreciate you being so open and honest about that. Because that was something say like I have my own viewpoints and everything. You have yours. I don't have
Yes,
any
yes,
compulsion to try to change your mind. And I really kind of get annoyed when people try to change my mind. I'm
yes,
totally
yeah.
open to hearing other people's perspectives, and I'm totally open to just trying to understand where they're coming from. Um, but I get the human compulsion of my own self trying to tell
Yes,
somebody else,
yeah.
get them to agree with me, and them trying to get me to agree with them. It gets a little annoying, and
And,
um,
and I just want to add something. My
sure.
father was a conservative. He was deeply conservative down to his bones.
Mm,
It doesn't mean he was, I mean, he always voted Republican, but um, so I had the privilege, and my sister was conservative also. I had the privilege of being with conservatives who were really good people. And that's just who they were. They were conservative. My mother was what we might call now a progressive. I mean, she was more liberal, not necessarily educated liberal where you took the classes how to be a good liberal.
mm,
So, um, so I'm more like my mother. And I think there was a point in my life where I said, I am a progressive. That's who I am. Now, that doesn't mean that every progressive, as I say, I think everything they say is just fine. It doesn't mean that. But I think when we really find ourselves, we get it in our bones in a way.
Mm,
So like if you're a conservative, it's silly for someone to say don't be a conservative. If it's in your bones,
yeah.
be the best conservative you possibly can. And I'm going to be the best progressive I can. And I'm going to try to keep my mind, very open, etc.
Mm,
Um, and that's something. And I wrote a book about Christian Democrats called Jesus Rode a Donkey. And so I learned a lot in writing these books, and then sort of just finally learned, like, who are you in this way? And
mm,
saying, yes, I got it figured out. And anyone who knows me would probably say, I I got you basically figured out. That doesn't mean all the nuances. It just means basically I know, where you fit in probably things you're going to care about.
yeah.
And I have worked very hard at moving past, um, well, I worked very hard about racism. I'm not saying, so many people say all of us probably have a racist part in us, but I've worked very hard on that. And I've worked very hard. I came to the conclusion I did not want barriers between me and another person. And I worked very hard on the transgender thing. And just, it's very easy to say, oh, no, terrible. And I said, that's not who I want to be. Is I really want to be open and respectful of people and their choices. And these are interesting journeys because you realize where you hit against something and say, okay, let's work about the green Martians now. I'm having a little trouble with the Martians. But, you know, but I'm going to just work on that. I'm as far along as blue. I'm getting close to green,
Yeah.
and so I think it's a light. I think maybe what you were talking earlier about, we go through transformational stages and experiences, and sometimes some people go through more than others. I've gone through a lot of them, and you hope they teach you something and that you come to a place that's comfortable but kind. I, I just have a lot of respect for compassion and kindness and openness, just relationally.
Yeah. I,
Oh,
I appreciate you sharing all that. Talking about transformation, so there's several things. One is I'm at an hour and 20 minutes, and I didn't want to keep you too long. Um,
we're
there,
doing good. I'm all right.
okay,
So,
so I was thinking maybe we could talk about transformation in book writing, and then
okay.
also we could wrap up with some last thoughts and words of encouragement for other learners, whatever their path might be. So for first, let's talk about transformation. You kind of touched on that, and one of the things I read in some of the writing books was in a good book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, it transforms you as the author. And I'm like,
Yes.
I I'm not sure if that's the benchmark. It's only a good book if it transforms you, or if because I kind of write to think what I write to figure out what I think, and then I edit a
Yes.
ton.
Yes.
Because
I
I
think so.
and uh, and so I I try to figure stuff what I'm thinking out loud. I mostly write nonfiction right now. I might go into fiction in the future. Who knows? Um,
Yes.
but you're much more experienced and been at the height. You have a benchmark book in the industry. That's fantastic. And my dad was really, really respected you
Yes.
as a script consultant. And we have your book, and I don't know where it is. I apologize if I hold it up. Um,
You can buy another.
yeah, I can buy another one. Um, but what have you noticed in your writing journey and transformations caused by your book? So you talked a little bit about how your book transformed your seminar training, but also I was curious more of a personal level is how it transformed you. Like your Democrat book transformed you, your script writing book transformed you, some of your other more spiritual books may have transformed you.
Yep.
I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, one thing is when you're first of all, writing is a discipline. So you say, if I'm going to write about this, I'm going to do the best that I can and do my research and do my talking to people and clarify, my thoughts in the pot in sort of what is it that I'm trying to say. So I think one thing is the discipline, another is the learning, and you feel I think there's a place in writing where it's coming out from you and you think, I didn't know that I thought that. Or, gee, that's a good sentence. I didn't know I could, say that. Or I think there's a sense you are the vehicle in some way. And I wrote a book called God's Part in Our Art, which has to do with that relationship of creativity and spirituality. I don't think they are intrinsically having to be related in any traditional sense, but I do think many of us say it flows through us and we try to be good receptacles and we try to put it out as clearly as we can. And I'm very excited I'm getting a Colorado Authors Award on September 6th. It'll be in Denver. In fact, you don't live too far from there, Valerie.
No, I don't.
And they want us to do a thank you talk that is not just thank you, but about something important that has to do with writing. And I really want to talk about the integrity of the author and telling the truth. And so we have 5 to 7 minutes, and I basically have my speech written about that subject and about the transformational um, writings of other people. It transforms us because we become clearer in our thought process and what we think. But I've had many people say making a good script grade changed the way they write, and that they have been so thankful for that book. They might say it was consulting and seminars as well. And that is really what we want to do or what we're supposed to want to do is to be helpful. And there is a part when you have a successful book, like making a good script great was and is, and it continues to do well, that people really think you're better than Wonder Bread. You are just, and you can get your head can get big and you buy the press, that you get full of yourself if you're not careful. But I have a friend, Kathleen, who helps keep me grounded. And one time I was getting full of myself and she says, remember, visions of you have not been seen in Bolivia. Isn't that a great thing? So when you start getting full of yourself, is just remember visions of you have been seen in Bolivia. And so I think what happens is there's a bubble you can, and I began to see what was happening. There's a bubble around you and you have a lot of control of what gets in that bubble. You can literally live your life where only the people coming to you are the ones who think you are absolutely wonderful. And anyone who's critical of you, you don't read that, you keep them out of it. They're not worth listening to. Or you get these attitudes and say, I don't think that's a good attitude. I don't think that makes me a better person to have those feelings. And I recognize different books, um, hit people in different ways. My book has changed them, but there's great books out there, Sid Field and Michael Haig and John Truby. And there's a long, Pamela Smith, and, there's a long list. And what you want is to say people need more than one teacher and they need more than one person in their life. And so I I've endorsed other people's books and I have tried to be helpful and I've helped them start careers. So Pamela J. Smith, who would be great to have on this
Yeah.
show, is a film mythologist.
Mm,
And I got her jobs abroad. And um, Dara Marks, I know I have made a big impact on her career and I taught her script consulting and I also got her job. So one of the things is as Judith Clare used to say, you want to be a giver, not a taker. And and she said, it doesn't hurt for you to recommend someone for a job, certainly a job that you can't take. So if Spain would contact me and say, we want you to come in April, and I say, I'm busy in April, but let me give you three other names of people. And a lot of people don't do that. They don't
mm,
recommend somebody else, but a group of us said, this is what we should be doing because it helps all of us. It helps all of our careers. And Pamela or Kathy Uneda, who was very influential with me and did a lot of seminars, she said, these are people we did good for each other and we nurtured each other's careers. And that's why we have such good careers in many ways. So, I think there's developed this attitude. And then I wrote a book sort of about this called Beyond Linear Thinking. And it's about linear thinking ranks people who's up, who's down, and it divides people who's above the line, who's below the line. And say, I have a model which is more circular, which I call web thinking. If you think of a spider web, is that you're connected. The line connects you rather than divides you and the circle includes you. And so you think of your relationships in terms of, who's in the center and you support each other and you just say it keeps ripples outwards. And you hope, maybe you said something and then someone repeats it to someone else and it makes their lives better because it's like this, this web. So,
mm.
um, that was my master's thesis in feminist theology. And then I rewrote it for mass media. So the book
Yeah.
Beyond Linear Thinking, it's not what you would think of as a scholarly book, although what I found was this way of what I call web thinking actually has made a huge difference in aviation, in the way hospitals run their hospitals, and the relationship between doctors and nurses, which used to be so hierarchical,
Mhm.
is that doctors actually listen to nurses now.
Uh-huh.
so, so it's sort of like changing the way you think and then applying that and being practical. And
Mm,
as you said earlier, as I tend to be very practical, I want knowledge that you actually can access and
yeah.
use.
Well, thank you very much. So we're at an hour and 30 minutes now, and
Okay.
so I could ask you one more question and then wrap.
Let's let's go for one more. We're having a
Okay.
good time.
So I'm trying to remember what it was. I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, internet. Yes. So you saw the development from the baby stages of the internet on forward. I was wondering
Yes.
how your learning and your interactions and your thoughts on just the research capabilities of the internet and also the fallacies of it. It's like there's a lot of false information out there as well. So, what would your
Well,
impressions and thoughts on the internet, you know, be?
well, one of the ways I certainly use it for research,
Mm,
but what I do is I really look at my sources. I want to have at least three, but usually five sources of if I am stating a fact and I want to check on it, say, give me five like good sources. Just because my friend Jane says so and so, that doesn't mean it's a good source for me for what I'm writing about. And I take everything I say pretty seriously. I try not to say, well, all people or everyone or um, or even sometimes people say, well, all people lie. And I said, I probably could tell you the lies starting with age 7. I did cheat. I cheated when I was 7 and I got everything
Oh,
wrong because I cheated with someone who had everything wrong. And I said, don't do this anymore. Have better sources or just stop cheating. I cheated
yeah,
on the test. And so, I'm very, like, for instance, I'm very uncomfortable around deceptive people, and I try to disengage as fast as possible because it doesn't mean everything about us is for public consumption. It means I'm either going to say, I mean, if it were really bad, there's hardly anything I won't talk about, but if it was really bad, I would just, you know, but I wouldn't lie about how I understand something. And so somehow that went into a value system.
yeah,
But I think with the internet, I think the big thing is being very careful with research, knowing not everything there is true. Who are my sources? Um, Try to have at least 3 to 5 good ones. And of course, it's easier to write a book now than it was. It's easier to access information. It's easy to get around legalities, and I don't. I really try not to do that. I get permission. I think in my book on the collaborative art of screenwriting, I did a lot of interviews. I was really careful to put down what that person said. And someone confronted me in fact, 2 people confronted me on what I wrote about. And I said, I will send you the transcript. This is what was said. It was not a bad thing that I said about these people. And one of them said, do you use this quote without permission? And I said, no, I have the piece of paper from your office that gave me permission to say that. And so, you try to be really, really careful about those kind of things. And I try to be careful about, name dropping, for instance, or pretending I'm something that I'm not. I think it's really important, when people say, oh, all those people, Ron Howard. And could you ask Ron in your next phone call to him? And I said, I interviewed Ron twice. He was incredibly generous with me. He knew my book. His father had given it to him, but that does not mean we are close personal friends. On the other hand, when he endorsed one of my books, we had a popcorn store in town, and I sent him a huge can of popcorn from the popcorn store to
nice.
thank you. And one of the things I learned is don't presume you have nothing to offer people who seem to be at a higher level than you. But also don't
Mm.
pretend that you know people. And I have a chapter in Unpacking where I talk about famous people who said bad things about me. Have you gotten to that chapter yet? Probably
I'm
not.
just about to read it,
But
and
it's
I'm
a
like, I
very,
ran out of time, but I'm like, this is good.
it's a really sort of a funny chapter because there are people, and sometimes they've said things in the classroom when they don't know I'm sitting in the classroom. And I thought, I don't think it's a good idea for you to do that. And I just sat there and I let the people in the class defend me. And after 8 hands had gone up to defend me, as someone next to him said, I've never seen anyone turn 8 different colors
Aw,
from their embarrassment of saying something bad about you, thinking you were not in the room when
yeah,
you were.
yeah.
And it was in Australia. I mean, there was no reason to think both of us were in Australia at the same time. I was from LA and he was from Europe. I thought,
Aw,
boy, you be say. And I once said something negative about not so much a colleague, but somebody who did titles for films. And I said a negative thing. And that night in the hotel, I saw a woman and she said, the guy who did the titles is staying at this hotel. This was in Copenhagen. And
Oh,
she says, would you like to meet him? And I thought, I hope you are a nicer person than I am. And I said, yes, I would like very much to meet him. And I said, I'm familiar with your work. It was so nice to meet you. And I said, Linda, even in Copenhagen, never talk. And my policy is never talk badly about a colleague.
mm.
Um,
Yeah,
and
my dad
because
taught
even
that to
in
me.
Copenhagen,
For those who don't know, my dad used to be an actor, writer, director. He passed away back in 2011. So I grew up in the industry with him and
and
worked.
what was his name? What
George
was?
Flynn.
Oh,
George
okay.
Flynn. Yeah, he wasn't famous or anything, but we worked in the trenches for many decades, and we were a family production team. And my my dad, he read tons of script writing books, including your own, and he brought you into Colorado a couple times, decades apart. Um, and he's like, this woman really knows her stuff. It's like he had a lot of respect for you, and and so it's like he taught me a lot of lessons about humanity and working in the business. And one of them is you don't badmouth anyone. If
Yeah,
you have to tell the truth, we've worked for some people who were not con artists, but scam artists. And we didn't know it at the time and we suffered for it. So we would warn people about those, that particular
yes,
one
yeah.
person privately. It's like, you may not want to work with us. We had bad experience. We're not trying to badmouth anybody, but we went
Just
through
be
a lot of
careful.
financial hardship because of this one person. But that's the exception to the rules. It's like
Yeah.
you just they work really hard.
And they might be in the elevator
Yeah,
ready to come
yeah.
out.
You never know who's gonna pass on what you say. And doesn't mean you lie and stuff, but you just you know everybody has their own story. Somebody could have a bad day for all we know. You know, and it just you meet them at a bad time or something like that. But my dad
Or
was a
they're
big
just
believer, don't
cheaters.
talk bad about anybody. It's like, don't. It's like,
I
don't.
mean, there are people who are cheaters, and
Yeah,
sometimes you do have to confront them about their cheating and just say,
yeah,
this is not okay.
yeah. So I really appreciate your time and spending time with me, and I really look up to you as a professional. And I know we didn't talk more in depth on screenwriting. I have another podcast where I talk about uh, based on my book, Writers of Meaning. If you ever want to talk more about writing in the future, you're more than
We
welcome
can,
to be a guest on that. Um,
yeah, we
one of
can
the
do that.
things. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can do that in the future. That's all
Yeah,
right with
there's
me.
no rush or anything. Um, and but one of my last questions I usually ask is, do you have any last thoughts or words of encouragement for other learners?
Yeah, is to, I think, to recognize that failure is, you will hit against obstacles and you will fail. And I always say, if you're going to fail, feel fine about failing big. That you had a big reach and you didn't capture the star. And you said, but boy, I tried and I was embarrassed about my failure. And it took me 2 years to kind of get back into good graces with this person. And, whatever that is don't be afraid to reach and don't be afraid to ask for help. Form a team around you if necessary, if you see yourself as a team player, of people who can help you and who have more expertise in certain areas than you do, and just value what they say. And if it seems good advice, is integrate it. But just remember, we're not individuals who exist without relationships. We are people are relationally. We have the gene for it. We tend to do better in relationships. So and say, don't be afraid of reaching out, and don't be afraid of failure, but also don't be afraid of success. Find people to help you when you get into a new stage and say, I'm out of my element. I said, somebody is an expert in this area. Find that person.
May I ask you one follow-up question on the expert thing? And I forgot to ask you earlier. How do you tell if someone is a good expert or a bad guide?
Oh, well, I think you try to develop an inner sense. So if I read something and I get nervous when I read something that says, well, everybody does, or nobody does, or, and those always raise my red flags. And if needed, I'll check sources where I say, I'm just not, it doesn't feel right to me, and so I'm going to check this out. And whether I do something with that, I will go. I have good friends like this Pamela J. Smith that I will call Pamela and I'll say, okay, how do you think I should handle this? I'm tempted to confront, but I'm not sure. And sometimes she says, don't get none of that on you, leave it alone. Another time she said, you are the best person to confront this and do it diplomatically, and I'll read your email before you send it. And so have good people around you and develop your sense of what is good. And if you get that feeling in your gut, take it seriously.
My dad was a big believer in following your gut. It's not
Yes.
always correct, but it's usually your subconscious is processing millions of bits of information, and you can't articulate it yet because the right side of your brain. Well, I know there's no right or left, but the right
Yeah.
hemisphere type stuff, intuitive part of your brain is analyzing stuff, and it can't articulate what's going wrong at the moment, but there are all these different reasons that are triggering that gut reaction. So you have been a delight, Linda. Thank you so
Well, thank
much.
you. Well, you are too, Valerie. I've just really enjoyed our conversation.
I did too. Thank you so much. And then thank you very much for tuning in to our fellowship. If you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to contact me at narfellowship.com. And there's more information about the podcast as well as the Curiosity Club. And thanks for watching. Bye bye.
Yes. Great.